We like to think, right, that the art world is this like wide open space, a place where you're free to express yourself, no limits. But what about the artists who, well, their very existence, even before they paint a stroke or, I don't know, sculpt something, is seen as controversial? Today we're going deep, diving into that exact issue with this organization called TATANKA.
And they're doing some really cool work. TATANKA, they use music. Can you believe it? Music as a force for social change, making sure that those voices that often get drowned out, those marginalized voices, are heard loud and clear. And what's interesting is they're not just like talking about it from the sidelines. They're in the thick of it, actively working to reshape the system from within.
Yeah, and their article, it's called Intersex and Transgender Artists, Discrimination and Bias. And let me tell you, they don't pull any punches. It really digs into this kind of contradiction. The art world loves to talk about diversity, but the reality for intersex and transgender artists, well, it's complicated.
It is. That's a really good way to put it. The art world, they love to celebrate diversity on the surface, but when you really look at it, genuine inclusion, particularly for intersex and transgender artists, is often, well, lacking.
Yeah, and it's like this unspoken rule. Be different, sure, but only in the ways that we're already comfortable with. And that's where things get, well, a little worrying.
Yeah.
Because this isn't just, some abstract idea, this bias. It has real-world consequences for these artists.
Absolutely. And the article, it really hones in on the composition of juries, the panels that decide which artists get to be in those fancy galleries or get that much needed funding. And think about it, if those panels are mostly made up of cisgender individuals.
And just a quick reminder for our listeners, cisgender means your gender identity matches the sex you were assigned at birth.
Right, exactly. So if those panels are mostly cisgender, then the system itself, even without meaning to, is going to perpetuate the biases that already exist, you see.
That's a really important point. We're talking about a power dynamic here, and it often leaves intersex and transgender artists at a disadvantage right from the get-go.
And it's not even just about who gets their work out there, seen in galleries and stuff. It goes way deeper than that. The article, it doesn't shy away from addressing the mental health struggles that are sadly already really prevalent in the LGBTQIA+ community.
It's really tough to hear about. The article, it talks about this one transgender artist who, during their own gallery opening, they're surrounded by people, right? It should be this amazing moment. But instead, they're bombarded with these really personal, invasive questions about their body. Just awful.
And that's just one story,
Right.
But it highlights the additional layer of stress and, honestly, trauma that these artists have to deal with in a space that's, well, it's supposed to be about creativity and expression.
The emotional toll is huge. The article talks about so many instances of harassment, people casually misgendering them, which is, using the wrong pronouns, and even just like straight up hostility aimed at intersex and transgender artists.
It creates this environment, right, where instead of feeling empowered to create and share their art, these artists, they have to use all their energy just to survive in a place that's, well, it could be hostile.
Yeah.
And it just makes you wonder, how much incredible talent are we missing out on because the system is, well, it's stacked against them?
That's a powerful thought. And it brings us to another disturbing aspect that the article really brings to light, this whole barrier to entry. It starts so much earlier than people realize. This isn't just about professional setbacks. It starts way before an artist ever tries to step foot in a gallery.
100%. The article, it talks about how a lot of intersex and transgender individuals, they run into these roadblocks early on. They might not have access to inclusive art programs. They might not have mentors who understand their experiences, their journeys. And some places, some institutions even have policies that are, well, let's just say they're openly transphobic.
So from the very beginning, the system is making it that much harder for these artists to even get their foot in the door.
And it's even more layered for intersex artists. The article really stresses how little awareness there is about intersex experiences in general. Intersex people, they're born with sex characteristics that don't fit neatly into those traditional boxes of male or female. So they're facing those same systemic issues, but with even less visibility, less support.
It's like being hit twice as hard in a system that barely even acknowledges you exist. It's a lot. But I do appreciate that TATANKA, they didn't just leave us with like a doom and gloom outlook. They actually offer some potential solutions, some ways forward. And it all starts by addressing the very foundation of how power works in the art world.
And that's really the key to all of this. The article, it argues that if you want real inclusion, You need representation at every single level, especially when it comes to making decisions. We need more LGBTQIA plus people in those positions, those curators, the gallery owners, the ones who actually have the power to give projects the green light, to decide which artists get that spotlight.
It's about like who gets to decide what we see, right?
Right.
Whose voices get amplified. And it makes you think about those juries, right? The ones we talked about, the ones choosing what art gets seen by the world. What if those panels, what if they
Yeah.
actually reflected the amazing diversity of the artists that they're supposed to be, judging?
Exactly, exactly. And that's where organizations like TATANKA, they're doing such important work. They're not just like talking about change. They're actually out there making it happen, creating more equitable paths for intersex and transgender artists to really thrive.
It's so refreshing to see an organization that's not all talk. They're actually walking the walk. And it's not even just about, getting art by these individuals into galleries and museums, although that's obviously huge. It's about like a deeper change, right? Shifting the whole culture of the art world.
It all comes back to challenging these deeply held beliefs about what is considered good art, what's important, whose stories actually matter. And those are tough questions to ask, but the article, it doesn't shy away from them, and we shouldn't either.
It's like we're being asked to really examine the entire system, the art world as it is right now. And it kind of makes you think, if this kind of bias can exist in a place that prides itself on being open-minded, on being progressive, well, what does that say about the rest of the world? The places that aren't so open?
And that's the heart of it all, isn't it? This isn't just an art world problem. It's everywhere. It's about power. It's about who gets to tell their story, who gets to decide what stories are heard. What we're talking about, it goes way beyond any gallery walls.
It really does make you think. If a place that's supposed to be about challenging norms, about celebrating what makes us different, if even they struggle with real inclusion, well, where else is this happening? Where else are we blind to the systemic issues, the biases that are right there in front of us?
That's why it's on us. We
Yeah.
have to actively search for those different voices, those different perspectives, challenge our own assumptions, and support the organizations that are fighting to tear down these systems of oppression, the ones that keep people down.
Tatanka, they're not afraid to challenge us, to tell us to do better. They leave us with this thought. If the art world, a place that's supposed to be all about open-mindedness, if they're still struggling with inclusion, what does that say about the spaces that we already think of as inclusive?
It's a powerful question, and it should make us all stop and look inward for a minute. Are we really as inclusive as we tell ourselves we are? It's about challenging the way things are, listening to the people who have been silenced for so long,
Oh,
and
yeah.
making sure that their voices are heard loud and clear.
It's a good reminder that making the world a more just, a more equitable place, it's not like you reach the finish line and you're done. It's something we have to keep working at, keep thinking about every single day.
And you know what? This is where it gets really interesting, I think. It's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed, right? Like,
Yeah.
where do you even start?
Mm.
But Tatanka, they remind us that creating change, it doesn't mean you have to like drop everything and become a full-time activist. It's the small things,
Yeah.
the everyday actions. Those can be just as meaningful, especially in our own little corners of the world.
It's like, how do we take those big ideas, right, about inclusion, about representation, and make them real in our own lives? The spaces we're already in, we don't have to reinvent the wheel or anything.
Exactly. It could be as simple as, actively looking for art that's created by intersex and transgender artists,
Mhm.
just diversifying what we're exposed to, the voices that we're like letting into our world. Or maybe it's, donating to organizations like Tatanka, the ones who are already out there on the ground making a difference.
Every little bit helps, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about like having those conversations that are, I don't know, maybe a little uncomfortable with your friends, your family, when you see bias happening,
Yeah.
even if it's not intentional.
Because, saying nothing, it often makes it seem like you agree. But when we speak up, even when it's hard, it can really help to like disrupt those patterns, the ones that keep these systems of exclusion in place.
It all starts with seeing it, right? Becoming aware. Once you start noticing the bias, it's like you can't unsee it. And then you can start making different choices, being more deliberate about where you put your energy, who you support.
The art world, for all the talk about being progressive and open-minded, it still has these deep-seated biases, these systems that keep certain people down. And it just goes to show, if it's happening there, in a place that's supposed to be about pushing boundaries, it's definitely happening everywhere else.
That's a sobering thought, and that's where TATANKA leaves us, with a challenge. They want us to look beyond those gallery walls, to really examine our own biases, and to get involved in creating a world that's more just, more equitable for everyone. And that wraps up our deep dive for today. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to TATANKA and the resources we talked about. Until next time, keep asking the tough questions and keep the conversation going.
Absolutely. Because like we said, it's an ongoing process, right? Building a better world, it takes all of us.